Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here this morning. We're ready to start our class and to ready to get going. And this is a lesson 289 in the Kabbalah Cafe. I was hopefully at the end of the class today. Last week, I know I wasn't able to put up the review sheet of last week's class. So after we've finished everything, I'm hoping I can get that up. So if anyone wants to take a picture of that, we'll have it up at the end. There's a great little story about a little child, one of my favorites, a little child who comes to his mother and he says, Mom, I'm very confused because when I speak to Dad and I ask him where we came from, what is the origin of mankind, he talks to me about the monkeys and the apes and evolution. And when I come to you and I ask you about where we come from, you talk to me about Adam and Eve and God and creation. So she says, listen, it's not a contradiction. He's talking about his side of the family. I'm talking about my side of the family. So today we're going to spend a little time talking about a little bit about the origins of the world in the sense of Kabbalah's spiritual narrative of creation as we've done in the past, but specifically focusing on one aspect of creation. First of all, I want to mention that this is a very important week in the world of Kabbalah, and that's because this Tuesday is the 33rd day of the Omer, and it is the anniversary of the passing of one of the greatest sages and teachers of Kabbalah, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, a Jewish teacher and a scholar from 2,000 years ago. He lived during the Roman era when the Romans occupied ancient Israel. In fact, he was a fugitive that was being sought after by the Roman authorities, and he hid in a cave for 13 years. Him and his son together hid in a cave. They survived on a spring that was in the cave and a small carob tree. So that was a carob tree, carob and water diet for 13 years. Miraculously, they survived. Probably didn't put a lot of weight on from carobs and water, but they lived there like that for 13 years. A very interesting man, but he wrote what we believe, according to most traditions, he wrote the book called the Zohar. The Zohar being one of the foremost and most important books of Kabbalah in the world is the book of the Zohar. Zohar means light, and these are teachings that have been passed down from generation to generation. Remember, Kabbalah, the word Kabbalah actually means to receive. To receive, it's a tradition that's received. It's not something that can be figured out on your own. It has to be received from above. It's information that cannot be deduced. There's a lot of how would you know these things? It has to be passed down. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai organized in some ways and really for the first time wrote down many of these teachings. Just like we speak about the exoteric parts of the Torah, the laws and the rituals and the traditions that were recorded in the Talmud and the Mishnah, for many years, those had been passed down. For 1,000 years, those had been passed down as an oral tradition. But at some point, Jewish people decided to write it down and record it in what was the Mishnah and then the Talmud, which you may have heard of. In the same way, in the esoteric, in the secrets of the Torah, for many generations, they were passed down orally. The first time they were really written down was by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai about 2,000 years ago. He recorded them in a book that we call the Zohar. The Zohar generally follows the portions of the week, but then goes into depth into many of the secrets based on the Torah portion of the week, many of the secrets of our world, secrets of the soul, the Sefirot, creation, and many different mystical teachings. It is a very, very difficult and cryptic work. I don't suggest you pick it up on your own and try to read it because it is very, very hard, very abstract, very hard to understand. But the point is that that's the beginning point of many of the teachings of Kabbalah, which were then further developed through the years. And his passing is on the 33rd day of the Omer, which is this coming Tuesday. And interestingly, he asked that the day of his death should not be mourned. He asked that it should be a celebration. That was his request. That was his dying wish. He said, I want that the day of my death not be mourned, but every year it should be a big celebration. And for 2,000 years, it has been celebrated by Jewish people around the world, especially in Israel, in a place called Meron, where he's buried. It's a very interesting place up in the mountains in the northern Israel. He's buried there in the mountains, and he asked that it be celebrated. What was his reason for asking that his death be celebrated? The reason is because he said that if you think about the soul's descent here in this world as a temporary state, that you come here for 80, 70, 80, 90, 100 years, whatever it may be. You come here and you have a mission. You're here on a mission. So when you come here on a mission, the day you die represents the day that you're finished and completed your mission in this world. It's the culmination of your mission. So from that perspective, it's a happy day. My mission has been completed. Now, for most of us, when we think about death, of course, it's not something that we celebrate. Judaism generally doesn't, because we are generally physical beings, and for physical beings, we understand that physical life is very precious, very valuable, and we also mourn the loss of physical life. When we lose a loved one, lose the physical presence of a loved one, we mourn. We find then comfort in the knowledge. After we're mourning, we also then try to find comfort in the knowledge that their soul came to this world. It's obviously finished its mission. It's finished its journey. But generally, the feeling is grief, and then we find some comfort in the knowledge that there is a spiritual meaning to it. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was a totally spiritual individual. He didn't really relate to the physical world much. He lived a very, very spiritual life. In fact, it baffled him that people would ever spend time earning a living. It's interesting. He said he didn't understand. He says, why would you do that when you could just study Torah all day? And it was just hard for him to relate to the reality of the physical world. It was the kind of the spiritual reality he lived in. So from his perspective, and the way he was living life, which was totally spiritual, there was no mourning at all. For death was not something to be mourned at all in his world. In his world, it was the culmination of a spiritual mission. And therefore, he asked that, though for us, that's not the way we do it. Usually there's grief on the day someone passes away. He asked that his day of passing be celebrated. And it is till today. So that's this week on Tuesday. So it is a very special week when we talk about Kabbalah. Kabbalah, of course, in the Zohar and the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and many other places, spend a lot of time speaking, as we've said, about creation. It's an enormous amount of teachings that deal with the origins and the mechanics that went into spiritual mechanics that went into creating our world. Why? It's not because that we're interested in the history of where we come from, of the origins. Do we come from the monkeys? Do we come from Adam and Eve, as we were saying earlier? That's not really the issue. It's not really the focus of knowing our history. It's more the understanding that when you know how something is created, if you know the mechanics of how something is made, then you understand its inner nature and how it works. Then you understand how it works. For example, when a mechanic learns, he learns how an engine is made. If he learns how an engine is made and he knows all the parts that go into making an engine, then he can fix the engine when it's broken. And the same thing if you think about a computer programmer. If a computer programmer knows the codes that were used to create the computer program, he can deal with problems that come up or new things that have to be created because he's got the code. Kabbalah is about understanding the spiritual code of creation. So we are empowered and understand the world we're in, how to fix it, how to enhance it, how to deal with issues when they come up, because we understand the inner mechanic, understand what our purpose is as well, because we understand the inner mechanics of the world. So Kabbalah does spend an inordinate amount of time speaking about creation. In that narrative about creation, the Kabbalah speaks about the fact that God first created, before he created our reality. And when I say our reality, I don't just mean our physical world, because our physical world is the last part of an entire structure of spiritual worlds, and our physical world is at the very bottom of that structure. So we're part of a major world system, so to speak, spiritual world system. So Kabbalah says before this spiritual world system was created, God created a world called the world of Tohu. Tohu means the world of chaos. So God began with a world of chaos. And what made it a world of chaos is that it had many of the same energies of our world, but they were each extreme. None of them had the ability to be compatible with another energy. So if it was kindness, for example, I'm using that as one of the spheres of one of the spiritual energies. Kindness was pure kindness, unadulterated, total kindness with no room for anything else. So it's not like when we speak about kindness in our realm, we can speak about discipline within kindness, and we can speak about compassion within kindness, that you can have different spheres or different emotions and different spiritual capacities that have within them the ability to have some balance with others. This was a world of extremes. And of course, We know that what happens when you have a lot of extreme energy in the same place, it explodes. It can't, it's unsustainable, too much. And there's the incompatibility doesn't allow it to be sustained. And that world, it said, shattered. And then God began to create our reality. Now, of course, this is not that God made a mistake, or he tried something and he says, whoops, that didn't work, let's try this all over again. Because if God is all-knowing, then God obviously knows the outcome. He knows what's going to happen. He knows what works and what doesn't work. It's not like us where we try something and say, whoops, that didn't work, let's try something else. That is not a godly experience, because God is all-knowing. Rather, this is really the pattern of every creation. If you think about it, when we create something in our lives, we always begin with a dream. We always begin with a utopian dream and a vision of what we want it to be. Now, the reality is, all of us know that that dream usually, at least initially, is not really sustainable, because it's not realistic. It's a utopian dream of what we want our life to be, what we want something to be. But and many times we start with that vision, but that vision is unsustainable, because reality is such that perfection is not possible. A utopian reality isn't possible. So as we begin to implement this dream and vision, either in our own minds, or as we begin implementing it in reality, we begin to have to create a more balanced reality, one which deals with all the different possibilities and all the different realities that are out there. So every creation begins with a business idea. You've got this utopian dream of what we're going to do and how it's going to work and how we're going to make billions of dollars. I'm just giving that as an example. But then reality sets in, and how do you implement this, and how does it work, and what happens, and so on and so forth. Relationships, we can all start a relationship with this utopian view of what this relationship will be. But then there's life and reality, and it isn't always as perfect as we initially envisioned. So every creation has to start with, and should start with, a idealistic, utopian, almost extreme dream of what we want it to be. And then we have to bring ourselves back to a reality. That dream is shattered in a sense. That dream can't be sustained, shattered, and then we have to implement something more realistic. And when we do so, when we do create something more realistic, what we end up doing is trying to achieve the original dream in a realistic way. So as much as we can, we're trying to, so to speak, achieve what that dream was, but in dealing with and in the pragmatic reality. And that's why in the Zohar, the way it expresses it, it says that broken world, there were 288, and we mentioned that number last week. It's a very important number in the Kabbalah. It's based on God's name, the 72-letter name of God that there are 4 versions of. And it says the 288 broken pieces of that initial world fell into our reality. Those are further subdivided into many, many smaller pieces. And that our job is, as we interact with the physical world, we choose. We can just interact with the physical reality just for our biological physical needs. That makes that in which way we are no different than any animal here in this world. Or we can choose to have a godly purpose, a spiritual meaning in what we do. We understand that when we do something, it could have meaning, it could have purpose. I could be making money, or I could be making money because I'd like to use much of it to help my family, raise my children. I want to give charity. I want to do good deeds. I want to make an impact in our world. I can eat food just for the fact that I'm a biological being and I'm hungry and I need to fulfill my needs. Or I could say, I need the energy to be healthy in order that I have the strength to go out there and serve God and do the right thing, and so on and so forth. So every act, every physical act can be a totally mundane act, totally materialistic, self-oriented, and mundane, or it can be spiritual, it could be purposeful, it could be for meaning and spirituality. And when it is for meaning, and when it is godly in a sense, we elevate the embedded sparks that are there. What that means is that we're achieving the original dream. The original dream, God's original vision, is a world that is physical, a world that is mundane and biological and generally self-oriented, in which there can be altruism, in which there can be godliness, in which there can be godly light. So when we do that, we are, so to speak, elevating these sparks. And interestingly, Kabbalah says that where we end up living and the things that we end up interacting with, and even temporary journeys. You're on a journey and you stop somewhere, and you're staying at a hotel, you're on the side of the road somewhere, you make a stop on the highway somewhere, wherever it may be, you're in the airport. Every place you go in life, it's because in that space, at that time, your soul has a mission to elevate godly energy that's there by using your time and using your that space for good, for godly purposes. And so it obviously means that when we live life on two layers. In Kabbalah, we live life on two layers. One is just we're dealing with the mundane reality. And so I had to, go to the doctor's office and sit there and wait in the waiting room because I have an appointment and I'm just there. And then that's one level. Another level is I'm here by divine providence. There's a purpose. There's an opportunity, and I'm here to elevate the spiritual sparks that are here. And of course, that gives life and every endeavor that we have in life a deeper meaning. That it's not just a mundane act, but it's part of something much greater, much more spiritual. So that is the way Kabbalah, again, one aspect of what Kabbalah talks about when we talk about creation, that we are dealing with the realistic fulfillment of this original dream. The dream, so to speak, is broken because it can't be sustained, but we are picking up the pieces by fulfilling the original purpose to the best ability in our reality, in our world. I'll stop here for a moment and unmute and take questions if there's anyone who has any questions, and then we'll continue on from here. So if there's any questions, this would be a good time. Let me just make sure that everyone can be unmuted. So if anyone has any questions, this is a good time.
Rabbi, the word,
yes.
The word that you used for chaos, I wrote it down, but could you spell it?
Yeah, the English spelling, the best I could do is T-O-H-U, tohu.
Okay.
Tohu. Tohu really means chaos. It's the word actually is found in Genesis at the beginning, where it says in the beginning of God's creation, there was tohu vavohu, which means chaos and void. So there is a concept in the beginning of creation of it that even when we read in the Torah about creation, it does mention chaos at the beginning. There's chaos. Kabbalah speaks about that in a more esoteric matter, that this chaos was a world that existed. And again, that represents all of our dreams. Our dreams and visions at the beginning, before we have to implement them, are chaotic in the sense that they're unsustainable. Because when we originally have our vision, it's pure, it's beautiful, but it doesn't necessarily take into account all of the realities. Life is about learning to take that beautiful initial dream and then implement it into reality. It's like the world that Adam and Eve begin in, which is a world of paradise, which is beautiful. It's the original dream, but what happens? It breaks, it falls apart. And then our job now is to recreate that paradise in our real world, in the reality. In dealing with all of our reality, with all the rough edges, so to speak, the imperfections and the balanced world we live in of good and evil, to implement that original dream of Adam and Eve. So it all begins with the dream and the vision. The dream and vision is shattered, and then we have to rebuild it within our reality. And that's the story of creation, again, from Kabbalah's perspective. So it wasn't that God, as I said, didn't messed up, or he didn't realize what was going to happen. This is the plan. You begin with tohu, you begin with a chaotic vision, and then you have to implement it into reality. Any other questions? Okay, so we are ready to continue with the next section. Okay, so we are, when we talk about the creation of our reality, as we've mentioned many times before, we talk about two systems. I'm going to briefly go through it quickly, but I want to focus on one particular idea today. So we talk about the fact that there is what they refer to as hishtalshelut, which means a evolution of chains, which that means is that the way we come to our reality is that there's an evolution that has to take place. If you start with something that's very abstract and very spiritual, and you want to make something that's very that is pragmatic and real and mundane and material, you have to go through a process of evolution. It's like a refining process. you have to refine something, or you have to this thing has to be contracted and limited, and it has to evolve in order to become that reality. And as we've said many times before, it's like that in every creation that we create. We begin with an abstract idea, a dream and a vision, and then from that we can maybe from the abstract idea, the vision, we can develop the idea, and then we can have an emotional response to the idea that we decide that we want to do this thing, and then we have to implement it in action through our hands and through our speech and so on and so forth. There's a whole process that you're taking something very abstract and you're bringing it into reality. So there is a concept in Kabbalah of, we take godly light. This godly light is slowly evolves from something more abstract to something that is less abstract, that is more real, and so on and so forth, to more real in the sense of the physical reality. And slowly but surely, this evolves into creation. So this is one concept in Kabbalah, that creation is an evolution. It believes in an evolution of godly light to create our world. But there is another concept as well that is spoken about, and that is yesh ma'ayin, which in English means something from nothing. That there is a concept in creation where God's starting point is absolute nothing. It's not that he's got godly light that he's evolving into make our reality. That our reality, before it, there is absolute nothing. And God creates something out of nothing. In fact, we're told this is what distinguishes our capacity for creation and God's capacity for creation. We are creators as well. We're inventors. We are creators. Mankind is constantly creating and inventing and making things. The only difference is that when we create, when we build, we are building something from something. We take one material and we make something else. As you know, we can take a gas and make a liquid into a gas. We can take different materials, and mankind has become very, very wise and very knowledgeable in learning how to manipulate and change and transform one reality into another, or we can take many different realities and put them together, and so on and so forth. We can create things, but when we create, we're not creating from absolute nothing. We're taking something and making it into something else. I can take wood and I can build a chair. I can take metal and I can build a car, whatever it may be. But I always have to start with some material. God's ability, and when we talk about God as creators, we say God as a creator is unique because God can create something from nothing. So, and as we've mentioned before, how does Kabbalah put together these two ideas? Is it a evolution or is it something from nothing? An evolution means you've got something you're starting with. You're starting with godly light. This godly light is evolving slowly but surely into a physical reality. Or is it something from nothing? So Kabbalah says it really depends, because our world is made of two parts. There's the physical world itself, the matter of our physical world, and there's the energy that sustains it. It's just like you have a body and a soul. There's the body of the world, there's the soul of the world. The world has a body, which is the material that you touch and feel. And then there is the soul, the energy that's in our world, that sustains it, that gives it its energy. So when we talk about the energy of the world is the godly light that is evolved to be the soul of our world. That is the evolution. The evolution is to take godly light and to bring it down to a level where it can connect with our physical reality on some level and sustain it and give it energy. It can be a soul to our world. But the physical matter itself, the table you see in front of you, the computer that's in front of you, and all the materials and the elements and the physical reality of our world, that is something from nothing. There was nothing, absolutely, that God had nothing to start with, and then he created this reality. And the reason for this is because when you're dealing with a gap that is when you're dealing with a gap that is small enough, then you can deal with an evolution. An evolution means that being that the gap is small enough, if we take this thing and we transform it and evolve it slowly, it can become something else. But that's when the gap is small enough that evolution can bridge that gap. But when you're dealing with a jump that is totally infinite, and there is no way to bridge that gap in an evolutionary process, then you have no choice but to create the new reality from absolute nothing. You cannot use what you have before it. You cannot bridge the gap. There's no relationship between these two things. So a godly light that sits in the highest of spheres, versus the godly light in our world, there is a relationship. They're both godly lights, except of course one is a lot less than the other, but there's a relationship. So if there's a relationship, you can evolve it. You can, if you put enough limits, like, you know, if you take all the power from the power station and you take that power and you slowly but surely put it through transformers that slowly but surely limit that, you can bring the power from the power station, the electric power station, to your home. Not the same amount of power in the power station to your home, because that wouldn't do very good for your home, but a limited version of it. But it's the same thing, just much less of it. So if we're going from godly light in the highest of spheres to godly light in, yes, evolution. But to go from godly light to physical reality, there's no relationship between the two. You can't, no matter how much you evolve, it's not going to get there, right? It's, think about the idea of, if I take one concept in my mind and I think about that concept, I can use the process of evolution in my mind to take that concept and develop another concept. What would be an example of that? If I know, just, this is very primitive, of course, but if I know that 1 + 1 = 2, I can then evolve that idea into another idea. That if 1 + 1 = 2, I can figure out that 2 + 2 = 4. That's an evolution, right? Once I know that 1 + 1 = 2, I can take that concept and evolve it to something else. But I cannot take an idea, like, say, if I'm thinking about a table, my thought about a table will not make the table unless I go do something. No matter how long I sit and think about the table will not appear. I'll have to go buy the woods and go get a hammer and get nails and build it. But the idea itself, from a thought, you will not come to a physical reality unless you create the physical reality. In other words, that's not, because they're in different realms. Within the world of thought and within the world of spirit, I can evolve from one thing to another. But to go from spirit to the material, there's a gap. Something's going to have to bridge that gap. And that's what we're talking about here, is that when God creates the physical reality, that's why we say God creates it yesh ma'ayin, which means something from nothing. There is absolute nothing, and then God makes, and only that's what makes God a creator in the truest form, because no other being has that ability to take absolute nothing and to create a reality, to create the physical. But again, because it is too big of a gap to bridge, otherwise it has to be created that way. In life, we're told that there are some things that in order to achieve them, we can't just keep evolving from what we are, where we are already. We need to go through a place of nothing to get to that new stage. For example, it's interesting that it says in the Talmud, there was once a great rabbi who studied in the academies of Babylon. There were Jewish academies in Bavel, in Babylon, and going back about 1,500 years ago, and these were the sages of the Talmud. And he decided he was going to move to Israel and study at the academies in Israel, where they wrote a different Talmud called the Jerusalem Talmud. But what he found is that the logical systems they were using in Israel was so superior and on such a different level and completely different paradigm than what they had in Babylon, that it says he fasted for 40 days in order to pray that he should forget all the learning he had studied and all the logical systems he had picked up in Babylon, so he could now take on this new understanding, this new way of learning in Jerusalem. In other words, the gap between the two systems was so great that he couldn't just take what he had learned and build on it, because this new system of learning was so superior, so in a completely different realm, that there was no relationship between the two. He had to unlearn everything he had learned to take on this new way of learning. He had to go break himself down to nothing in order to take on this new reality. Sometimes when we're trying to create, when the gap is too big, when we're trying to create something brand new that is not related in any way to where we were before, we have to first go down to nothing, and then we can create something new. In the world of recovery, of course, we know that this concept is you have to hit rock bottom. In other words, sometimes a person's in a place, no matter how much they think and work and this and that, they're just not going to get to where they need to get to. They're stuck in a certain paradigm, in a certain addiction, a certain behavior, a certain attitude, and nothing they're going to do is going to get them to that next level. The evolution is not going to get them there. They have whatever they have, their current whole system, their whole being, their whole paradigm has to be shattered, it has to be broken. And then from there, you can start again. You can start something new that was not related to the past reality, because it comes after a breaking down, a total hitting rock bottom, a total breaking down. Or for example, if you think about a business, right? A business that's failing. And sometimes a business is failing. You say, well, listen, if we change this, if we change that, if we do this, if we do that, we can turn things around. There are circumstances, and some of you may have come across this, where things are so dysfunctional, things are such a mess, there's no choice. You got to shut it down, declare bankruptcy, shut the thing down, start something else. Because that you're not going to be able to take that reality and make something of it. The gap is too big. You have to go down to nothing. In spiritual terms, in our spiritual lives, this is really the concept of humility. Humility means that when I break myself down into nothing, when I become humble and I become like nothing, then that opens me up to all sorts of possibilities. It's interesting that in our prayers, we talk about that concept of nothingness, of making ourselves spiritually humble, like nothing. We speak about becoming like the earth, right? Because the soil, the earth, represents humility. It's everyone treads on the earth. It's nothing. It's just earth. It's just the soil. But then think about what can grow from the earth. What are the possibilities of what can grow from the earth? Anything can grow from the earth. When a person becomes humble, when a person's broken down to zero, what can be created from that is endless. The possibilities are endless. And again, that's another thing. So there's two concepts here. Number one is that when there's a gap that's too great to bridge, you have to sometimes break things down to nothing to allow something new to come about. And that when you break something down into nothing, the possibilities of what can be are endless, right? If I have a picture on a piece of paper, a picture of a house, and I say, okay, I'm still working on this picture, so I can make the house this color, that color, I can add this, I can add that, but in the end of the day, I'm limited to the picture is going to be a house because that's what I've drawn here already. But if I have a blank piece of paper and nothing's on that piece of paper, what can I draw on that piece of paper? What are the possibilities? And the answer is endless. There's the possibility anything could be there because my starting point is nothing. And so, and again, this reminds us of the great power of humility, but also reminds us that if I have a state of being and I've got to come to another state of being that is totally different, sometimes I have to have a nothing in between. To go from this state of being to this state of being sometimes requires that there's a breaking down, a nothing in the middle. And that nothing, that breaking down in the middle, is what allows for something, a whole new reality to come about. I want to suggest, and I'll take questions after this, that the pandemic and the situation we've been in over the last 8 weeks has created, of course, a lot of pain and sorrow. And unfortunately, I speak to people every day that are dealing with that pain and sorrows, a lot of human suffering, not to be forgotten. I have, unfortunately, 20 colleagues of mine, classmates of mine, who have lost their parents in the last 8 weeks. So just to, it has definitely hit certain communities more than other communities. I'm talking about 20 friends of mine, personal friends and colleagues, classmates of mine that have lost parents in the last 8 weeks. So there's a lot of pain, a lot of human suffering, there is no question. But in many ways, when we face a situation like this, we also have to look for and find the opportunities and to see and to try to find the blessings and the opportunities of how the sorrow and pain and the state that we're in can lead to something greater. And in many ways, for many people, it has put a stop to their regular lives. Their regular lives have been put on hold. Or just to give you a thing to think about, never since the time of Moses, we're talking about 3,300 years, has every synagogue in the entire world been shut down. It's never happened, never in the entire history of the world. Even when Jews were persecuted in one place, there were always Jews in other places that had their synagogues open. We're talking about an unprecedented reality in which the entire Jewish world has come to a halt. Everything that we usually do as Jewish people, all our usual traditions as a community, as a congregation, has been put on hold. It's stopped for the last 8 weeks. We are in a state of nothing as far as congregational Jewish practice. It has completely been put on hold. and just in some places they're beginning to come back to that reality. But when you have nothing, there is an opportunity when you have nothing, because when you are in a certain state and you're trying to evolve that state, there are limits how much you can evolve that state, because you're limited by your starting point, which is whatever you have. But when your starting point is nothing, when you take a break, a total break from something, and you have to restart it, there are so many opportunities as far as what you can create now. So many things you're not limited to by, but this is what we did yesterday. There is no yesterday, there's no day before. It's a brand new reality. And there really is an opportunity to create something new that is completely different than the reality that existed before. When you're brought down to nothing, nothingness gives you an ability to recreate something that's very, very different. Even in our personal lives, for many people, this has been a time of stopping of work or stopping of our regular schedule, stopping of things the way we usually do them. And it is an opportunity that when we, so to speak, go back to whatever they call is normal or not, whatever you want to say it is, but to create something different, not the same, but to create something very, very different and very new that is much harder to create when you're just in your regular life, because you're dealing with a reality that you're trying to evolve and change. It's a lot easier to change things when your starting point is nothing. And so we have to think about what are the things that we want our lives to be and look like coming out of this nothingness, because there's a lot of possibilities when you're starting. If your starting point is zero or nothing, or a clean slate of paper, a clean sheet of paper, what you put on there right now is really up to you. You really have much more choices than usually. So that is, again, just a teaching from the Kabbalah about creating something from nothing, that sometimes it's needed when there's a gap that's too great, and the possibilities that kind of reality creates. I will unmute, take questions, and then we'll go through our review sheet we have. I'll put it up as well. So if anyone has questions. Okay, so you can ask your questions if you want after the sheet. I'm going to put up the sheet now. This is the review sheet. Hopefully this will work this time. And I need. Okay, so we'll start with lesson 289. That's today's lesson. Kabbalah, a world of chaos before our world. Each time we create it begins with an unsustainable dream that has to be replaced with a balanced reality. Remember, that's what we said. With an unsustainable dream that has to be replaced with a balanced reality. The 288 broken pieces of the world of chaos are elevated when we use the physical for the spiritual. So when we use the physical things in our world for spiritual, meaningful things, we elevate and we fulfill that dream, the original dream. Our creation is both an evolution of godly light and creation from something of nothing, as we said. Something from nothing is needed when there is a gap too large to bridge. When we're trying to go to something completely new, it's sometimes you have to go through nothing first. In spiritual life, something from nothing is through true humility, like the soil. You become like the earth, like the soil, where the possibilities are anything. Creation from nothing means there are unlimited possibilities. And of course, this is seeing the opportunities in our current state of nothing, in a sense, that spiritual life, at least congregationally, has come down to a nothing. So what we come back and create needs to be very, very different, because we have that opportunity to create something from nothing where the possibilities are really endless. Take that, just leave that up there for 3 more seconds if anyone else wants to take a picture of it or do something with that. And then I'm gonna also take questions if there are any, and then I will share last week's sheet. I think I got it to come up this week. So, because last week at the end of class, I was not able to put up the review sheet. So I'll do that now. So
I have a comment or a question.
Yes, go ahead.
I was doing this Torah study online yesterday, and we were talking about the power of prayer and how it's supposed to be more powerful in a group or with other people. In this situation, how are you dealing with that? I mean, like you said, our whole thing has changed. We're not able to go to synagogue to do our prayers.
Right. The answer is I don't have a solution for that aspect of congregation and community. Zoom works to some level, but it's definitely not the same as getting people in the same room, as I think all of us have come to the realization. So we've found ways to do the best we can, but there's no question that what we're dealing with is a situation that's not best. It's compromised, but I'm saying today that compromise And that sense of the nothingness, the fact that the synagogues are closed, the buildings are shut down, and much of what we usually do in our own lives is shut down, creates a void and a nothingness that creates many, many, many opportunities to rethink and to restructure and say, you know what, maybe we need to do this differently. Maybe there's a completely new paradigm in the way things can be done. Of course, when I say new paradigm, I mean it has to be consistent with the spiritual guidance that the Torah provides us. But within that, there's so many opportunities to do things differently, completely differently, and improved in ways that are beyond anything that we could have achieved, just evolving from where we were before. Going from something to nothing, that next step of what you create from there has unlimited potential and possibilities. So a lot easier we are in a place now where it's a lot easier to make change and than it's ever is because of this break in life. And I think this is not only true for Jewish people, I think it's true for all mankind. Many people have talked about rethinking certain things about their lives during this time, and maybe realizing that the BCE, the before Corona era, had some areas of life that needed improvement, change, and maybe we need to reimagine some things about our lives. Any other questions?
Do you have some ideas about what you're thinking when we go back?
Do I have ideas? Yes, I do. But my ideas are really more congregational in nature in the community. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about that. I don't have necessarily all the ideas I want. You know, sometimes you feel like you've got ideas that are percolating and you can't quite grasp what they are yet. So some ideas I have concrete ideas, some ideas I'm still developing. I feel like it's like, you know, sometimes you have words at the tip of your tongue and you're trying to grasp what you're thinking. So definitely I am thinking along those lines, but I think what's more important is that's my job to think about congregation. But for each of you, I think it's about your own personal lives. And I think that's even more important is, you know, can this be an opportunity where your personal life, you come out the other side looking very, very different, new in many ways. I'm not saying, obviously these things have to be realistic, sustainable, as we began the class today. We can't take on things that are beyond our capacity. We'll crash if we take on resolutions that are beyond what's sustainable. It's just going to crash and like the world of chaos. But I do think there's a possibility of change that's unprecedented in nature. So, and as far as my ideas for the congregation, they will be coming forth as we come back together. Those some things that I definitely are very eager to share as we start to come back. Any other questions?
Any comment about this experience perhaps strengthening people's experience of the Sabbath, which
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think it's
we're thinking that less observant Jews have been forced to perhaps experience being more observant. You know, the sort of thing they would normally do on a Saturday, you can't do.
Right. Well, I think in general, I'm not talking about only Jewish people. I think in general, for people, Sabbath is really a slowing down of time. It's about stopping, taking a deep breath, looking around and appreciating, first of all, the people around you, and taking time to listen to your own soul, to listen to God, to listen to the people around you. So it's a slowing down. And I think even for all people of all faiths, this time has been a time to slow down again, and the slowing down has allowed them to maybe appreciate, think about maybe things in their lives that they usually are so busy and life is so hectic that they are not able to do. So the hope, of course, is that people can reprioritize certain things in their lives, including the Sabbath and including many other things of that nature. Okay, so I'm going to share also last week's class on here, just the sheet. If you want to take a picture of that, just give me a moment here. Hopefully I can do this. So let's see if I can find this. Okay, this was last week. If you remember, this is just the highs and lows of spiritual life. I'm just going to read through it one time. You can take a picture of that, whatever you'd like to do. So the story of life is a conversation and struggle between the godly and animal soul. Many times it is hard to discern which soul is talking to us. Life has moments of inspiration followed by uninspired times. At times we can feel hypocritical, fake, and unauthentic if we know we cannot sustain the inspiration. This might feel like a valid and godly call for consistency and truth. Since this argument wants to tone down our inspiration, it is from the animal soul, and there are three basic responses that Kabbalah gives to this call for truth and consistency. Number one, the world is created and sustained by energy that comes down, then transcends our reality. This creates a natural rhythm in all our reality. In our spiritual lives, it is expressed with a cycle of ups of inspiration, followed by the low of uninspired moments. In other words, that's the way it's supposed to be. Number two, growth is achieved by creating higher lows, higher highs, so that the low is relative to each high. And finally, God cherishes the temporary tense created by the average person more than the consistent dwellings of the saints. As we said last week, God knows that we can't be consistent with inspiration. It's the way he made it. And he does cherish the fact that here and there we do get those moments of inspiration. That's just last week's class. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but I know I wasn't able to post that, so I'm just posting it now so you can have it up there. I want to thank everyone for coming, for learning, and God willing, we should all have a great week and think about all the possibilities that this nothingness can lead to, and the potential and the where we can go with all of this. Thank you, everyone, for joining and participating.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Have a wonderful week.
You as well. Bye-bye.
Rabbi,
Yes.
just one last question, if I may. You know,
Sure.
So God created human beings. That is God's blueprint.
Yes.
But when human beings try to create something, for example, as you said, there's a blank piece of sheet of paper, creating a house. You know, I mean, how do they do it? What's the beginning of the beginning if there's nothing on it? How do they build a house, a table, a chair? The person has been created by God. That's God's blueprint. But how do we know what to draw? Where to start?
So
What do
God,
we
for what we should create, God gave us a Torah. The Torah is because that's a critical piece, because if you want to teach people what to create in life, you've got to give them guidance. So God gave us guidance in the form of the knowledge of what we should create in life and what we should make of our lives, both spiritual, the physical, and everything. So that is the guidance that we have as far as what we should make. But the idea is that once in a while in life, we're given a clean slate of paper, a brand new start. It's very hard, you know, once you're way into something, it's hard to change. But when you get a brand new start, you get a fresh start, possibilities are endless. And I think we need to think about this situation we're in as a fresh start, as a new beginning. And hopefully that we can have the imagination to think about what that could look like, what we want it to look like.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone should have a wonderful week. Lots of blessings, success in all that you do. And thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.